We talk about sustainability. Wait a minute, we're already 75% of the way there. There's this idea that people say, oh, golf is a sterile ecosystem. But the research is actually showing they're not.
Beth Guertal, welcome to Changing the Business of Golf.
Thank you.
Beth, in this series, we talk to our guests about the things that they would do to change the business of golf for the better. And we'll come on to some of your ideas in a moment. But first, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you've been doing, how you ended up in the golf industry, because it wasn't necessarily a planned move, I think.
No, it was not. So I am originally from Columbus, Ohio, which is right in the center of the state. I went to The Ohio State University, which lots of people do. And I did start in agriculture because I come from a family with agriculture connections. We're not from a farm, but everybody was involved in agriculture. And I thought I was going to do row crop ag. That's what I did for my BS degree. That's where I got all my experience. That's who I worked for, row crop soil fertility. And I did that, BS, MS, PhD. And then I go to Auburn University for a job. I do vegetable crops for 5 years. And then the entire turfgrass program retires simultaneously. They'd offered a really generous buyout for people to leave, and they left. So my boss comes down the hall and he says, "You're turfgrass now." I'm, okay. And I spent the whole first year going, well, I've learned something here. I won't do it that way next time. I mean, the terms were different, the technologies were different, everything was different. But so that was around 1998, and I grew to love it. I love the people, I love the students, I love teaching turf, and been doing it for 30 years now.
Had you been on a golf course before that point?
A little bit.
Were you familiar with the golf
Yeah,
industry?
like I'd played, not well, got a terrible handicap, but I had not worked. And a lot of times there's a real defined sort of legacy as you work your way into turfgrass research. As a high school student, you work on a golf course. In college, you work on golf courses. Then you do internships at really high-end courses, and then you get your master's degree and you keep going. And I didn't really do any of that.
What was it like entering the golf industry at that point? Because I guess there probably weren't too many women working in those professional roles at that time.
There were not. There were a few women who, to this day, are still very good friends of mine, but a lot of them were more interestingly, like the first point of entry was plant breeding. So we still have a very strong contingent of women that were in plant breeding, or what happened was their BS degree was in the biological sciences. So there were a few leading women in plant pathology and entomology whose degrees were more in biological sciences. And I was kind of one of the first that came out of a more classic ag, fertilizers, soil science background.
And what about the changes you've seen over that time? You know, you've had a whole career, spent a lot of time in the golf industry over that period. What changes have you seen?
Well, if you talk about the changes in people, I think you're seeing a lot more women entering into the market and doing well, both in industry and academia. And Syngenta has actually been a leader in that because some of the technologies that they're partnering with, they're making really strategic hire of women to be representatives for them in those areas. Some of the soil moisture sensing and some things like that. And so more and more, when you look at academic jobs, you are seeing a lot of women in very competitive hiring pools. So we're doing really well there. If you look at turfgrass management, I think you're seeing a couple things. One, on the technology side, you think like the robotic mowers and sprayers that are precision sprayed to spray weeds only in certain places. So you're really starting to see the implementation of AI and things like that. And then the other, which is less fortunate, is it's been hard to staff and hire people to work on golf courses. So that's kind of leading to a gap in professional development and the concept of professionalism in what a superintendent or a greenskeeper does.
And we're going to come back to that point in just a few minutes. Beth, your first change is about changing the perception of golf courses to value-added ecosystems. Now, what do you mean by that?
So this term, ecosystem services, is maybe a decade old, and I should know who coined it, and I've forgotten, so we're just move on from that. Ecosystem services is this idea that whatever ecosystem you're looking at provides added value. And I think that The golf courses and the golf course industry, I will say that Europe is far ahead of us in recognizing this value. We need to do a better job. So if you view the golf course as a watershed, everything comes into and out of it. It moderates temperature of the houses around the golf course. It helps to filter sediment and pollutants that might come through. It provides habitat for wildlife. It provides recreation if you go early in the morning, the people who are walking or jogging on the trails. If you're in the right climate, it's cross-country skiing. And you can take ecosystem services beyond just that and broaden it and talk about those people that came to ski fill their car with gas and they maybe get something to drink after they're done. And that all brings value to the ecosystem because of the presence of that golf course.
I was listening to a writer speak recently, a nature writer, talking about how, in some ways, we're doing a disservice by talking about the environment as if it was something separate. It was
Mhm.
something over there. And what you're kind of saying is that the golf course is not somewhere separate. It's very much part of nature and everything around it, and we're part of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one thing I like about the vast majority of superintendents is most of them welcome nature and they really if you follow some of the Facebook chat groups and other places, or several of them now have really popular webcams, eagle cams, where they set the webcam up and you can just log on and watch the nest and see what's going on with the eagles, for example. But even some of the face like they'll have like, oh, look at the foxes that made a den in my bunker. And the reaction could be the foxes made a den in my bunker. But instead, they kind of welcome that and they'll stake it off and they'll keep people away from it until they've raised the kits and the family's moved on. And I think that extra service, like welcoming people who want a bird and watch for birds, we need to talk about that more.
Yeah, and that's the term value added as well is interesting because it's, in some ways there's a danger, isn't there? We put a camera up and we say, oh, there are the birds, that's nice.
Mhm.
But it's more than that, isn't it? Because nature is important and it has an inherent value which often isn't costed in to
Right.
the way we do business.
Well, and there's this perception that a golf landscape is a sterile ecosystem, and that kind of drives me crazy. And there's actually some really new research coming out with this whole concept of regenerative agriculture. And it's sort of fomented on this idea that you have to have lots of diversity and difference in 35 different species. But the research is actually showing you can have diversity with maybe just one or two species. It might not be the same, but it's still an ecosystem. And I think in golf course, we need to do a better job of talking about the fact it's certainly by no means a sterile.
So that, on the one hand, talking about it, but you need the information. You were talking about new research. You need the data. You need the facts to
Right.
present. So
Absolutely.
what do golf courses need in terms of that data and that information to be able to demonstrate that they are a value-added ecosystem?
Well, and I think that comes to one of my other things, which is we have to recognize and continue to push for added education. So you do things like the golf course management has the show and short courses. BTME has shows and short courses. There are national. One new thing that has started is an agreement between the United States Golf Association. I'm probably going to miss half the people. The European golf guys and BTME, no, RNA, there, I got it right, RNA, and they are about to fund some significant research that will touch all of those organizations, and that research is gonna be a little different because it's much more it's not just, "Let's spray this herbicide and see if a weed dies." It's very holistic in its approach.
How do we engage customers or golf club members in this as well? Because this is important. I mean,
Yeah.
often the members, the customers are also advocates.
Right,
You were talking about the importance of the superintendent or the greenkeeper there as an expert, something
right.
to be able to communicate about it. But do we need to engage customers and members, one to be proud, but also to advocate?
Right, and I think we do, and the problem is, like, so much, then the workload comes back on the superintendent, which is unfortunate, but and we were talking today in one of the classes about how to do things like nutrient and sediment mitigation, and we know buffer strips work. You just create an area, of maybe a little higher mowing height of a certain width, and you don't put fertilizers there. So they act as basically a natural sponge and they filter, right? Well, then with that should come a really cool little information sign. And nowadays, you could even have the little scan code so they could take their cell phone and that would take them to some more information or maybe data about look at how we've reduced the nutrient load through these buffer strips. But who's that work fall onto? The superintendent. So that then means the superintendent has to communicate the importance of this signage to the Greens Committee, and their time has to be allocated correctly.
And this comes back to a conversation I was having earlier with someone else
Mhm.
about, the pressures that superintendents are already under. We know that there's labor shortages,
Yeah.
um, but it's also about putting the golf course, which is essentially the central product, is part of the value proposition, properly into the business plan and seeing it as a holistic business, which
Mm.
is kind
Right.
of a reflection of an ecosystem as well.
Exactly. And here I am going, well, let's just put some more work on this poor overworked human being. But I do think that there are buy-ins and buyouts and there certainly is this concept of marketing. And I mean, you see it with Twitter and Instagram and all this that some people are getting very, very well known for this because they'll put up pictures and they'll engage with the public and do things like that. Like one of the guys at Mississippi State that's doing some really cool cutting edge work with these sprayers that you map the and it senses the sprays and then it only direction. That thing went for turfgrass semi-viral when they put a little video up the other day. And there were probably like 30 people. Oh, where do we find out about this? How do we do this?
And it's that demonstration that's important. It's not
And it
just
was a short
talking.
little video
Yeah.
clip and everybody went, ooh, and there we go.
So your message then to golf courses and golf businesses in terms of changing the perception to value-added ecosystems is change the perception, go and talk about it differently, demonstrate it differently.
Right, and I think they're doing a lot of things correct, like the program with bringing school-age children to the course and talking about things and engaging, but it is work. I mean, when working for Auburn, like, one of the small little things I do and people make fun of it, but I regularly give talks to the retiree groups, the Rotarians and the Kiwanis Club, and I eat a lot of bad chicken at country clubs, and then I'm like the half an hour entertainment after lunch, right? But they love it, and you can get a message across, and those are the folks that are paying memberships at these golf courses.
Beth, your second change for the business of golf is facilitating and encouraging continuous professional development.
Mhm.
We mentioned it earlier. Why is that so important, do you think?
I always tell the groups because when I'm talking to them, I'm like, look, you're already here because you've come to this meeting, to whatever, and it's not just to get pesticide points. You're here because you're interested in the education and it means something. So you've already elevated yourself to another level because you're interested in it. So now keep going. And what does that look like when we say keep going? And there's a lot of various mechanisms in place. So, like, Ohio State has a certificate program. Penn State has the online four-year degree. There's a lot of resources, but those do always come with a financial. So again, to harken back to like Syngenta that will support this kind of stuff. I think it's really important. I think we need more partnerships like that so that education can often be very low cost. So you look at somebody like GCSAA, and I do a lot of this. They'll have online education and we work towards certificates and other things. All of that puts the superintendent in a more valuable position because it shows they have more education.
And it's necessary, I guess. The job is getting more complex.
Mhm. It is, and then the education gets more diverse as well. So, you may have to have education about legal things, like what are the regulations and laws for the the fertilizer application in a certain state that all of a sudden now has some legislation around that. So, um, we'd like to think it got simpler, but I don't think it has, and so there's always things they can be trained in.
And, this is important because the sustainability of the golf business, keeping good people in the industry, keeping turf professionals in the industry, as the job becomes more complex,
Right.
they need more support, presumably, to be
Yeah,
retained in the industry.
absolutely. I mean, and if again, you start as we work into robotic mowers and robotic sprayers, well, somebody's gonna have to have the training to repair and fix and software. You suddenly have stepped everything up of several notches. So all of that has to be there.
What would you say to a club manager or a board, a club board
Mhm.
that's listening in on this and saying, "Well, this is just gonna cost me more money because I've got to, invest more in the superintendent."
Yeah, they should. I mean, our superintendents are not paid what they deserve. You do see in some markets, high-end markets, the one thing that's happened for the better is that assistant superintendents may become a person may retire out of that position, but that's still a rarity. And I think we continue to need to reflect on spray tech to assistant to superintendent, adequate pay for that, and the other benefits, because what we sometimes still see is lower level, those are hourly positions, and then they get worked to death, and all of a sudden the hourly pay is not really great. So we need to treat people with professionalism and reward them appropriately. And that includes insurance and benefits and time off, and all of that starts to go back into the mental health issue.
Yeah, and so what do you see when you go to courses? And obviously you're dealing typically with the superintendent, I
Mhm.
guess, but, kind of what sort of pressures are they under, and what do clubs need to think about to
I think there's a lot of it'd be more interesting to ask the superintendents, what matters to you? But, like, sometimes I'll go into places, and it's funny how quickly you can get a sense of the quality of that club. And sometimes it's just things like, what does the maintenance facility look like? Has the club invested in a high quality maintenance facility? Does the superintendent have their own professional office, and do the assistants have those facilities? What do the carts look like? What is Now some of that is a reflection of the superintendent themselves, but some of that is just professionalism top down.
so your message to golf businesses in terms of continuous professional development is invest in the individual, invest in the team.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost one of those ones where it's sort of like, I always say when people sort of say things, well, okay, turn it the opposite way, and if it sounds really stupid, like, "No, don't invest in them, divest in them, don't put any resources in" well, that sounds dumb, doesn't it? Yeah, so you invest, and you invest in education, you offer opportunities, you offer growth, um, and that everybody professionally just and then you're training the next generation, because when I know a superintendent runs a facility that way, and she is top notch and doing a wonderful job, I will send my students there for internships, and then they learn how to do it right.
Beth, your final change for the business of golf
Mm.
is improving the communications, the way golf courses communicate environmental sustainability. The perception has to change, so
Mhm.
the story has to be told as well.
Right. This concept that golf courses are a sterile wasteland occupied by middle-aged white guys who are, in a golf cart, and it's just it's not true. And we need to do a better job of talking about things like municipal golf and the wide variety of folks that play, and youth golf, and women playing golf, and all the people that can engage in this hobby. But environmentally, again, it's and so when you look at what makes soils healthy, and these are 4 tenets that a lot of people talk about, and let's see if I remember these. These are: keep the soil covered. So bare soil is unsafe soil that's prone to being eroded, right? So keep it covered. Maximize the period of maximum root growth. You want lots of roots there, okay? Use perennial crops or perennial cropping, and the fourth one is diversify your plant species. And I tell superintendents this all the time. When we talk about sustainability, wait a minute, we're already 75% of the way there. We do those first three things. We keep our soil covered, we minimize the disturbance, and we maximize plant growth. Okay, diversifying. We focus on grass, but you could do other things outside. And one could argue we diversify because we have shrubs and trees, right?
Absolutely, but what's interesting is the way you've just explained it there is not necessarily the story that goes out, and or in fact, the perception that's left is quite a negative one from the
Exactly,
outside.
exactly. And so when we talk, and I know there's this perception that it's a zone of high levels of pesticide use and lots of water waste, but some of that is 20, 25 years ago. And you look now at how we manage water and how we are narrowing up irrigated areas. And like there's courses in Arizona that are experimenting with sub-irrigation underneath, gray water effluent. We have gotten so much, and I think we're failing to tell that story as we move forward. We're looking at grasses that have incredible salt and drought tolerance, and many of them are ready to be, they're about to be planted in some areas. And I don't think we do a very good job of talking about how far we've come with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting because everything you're saying there, again, from the outside, it's completely different perception. So,
Right,
what do clubs, what do it's not just the superintendent, but
right.
often they're the ones who are pushed forward. But what do clubs, golf businesses need to do to get out there and talk and presumably talk to their communities? That it's the local community that is
Right.
probably a great starting
And
point.
I think it's a smaller example of what to some degree is maybe a distrust of science in a way. Because again, they think, "Oh, you just waste everything." And I'll say things like, "No, we are driving nitrogen fertilizer use lower and lower. We are using it in lower rates than we ever have because we have more efficient grasses and people have figured out we don't need to do that." And those so how do you make that message move over to people who either don't wanna hear it or don't care about it? And that's the link we have to figure out.
And presumably it's about facts, isn't it?
Yeah,
Just putting the
right,
facts
but
out there.
sometimes people don't wanna hear those. I do think some things are happening, like more and more on high-end golf tournaments, you'll see little vignettes or shots where they talk to the superintendent or they talk about something that's happening correctly, and I just think we need to keep doing that to kind of change this conversation.
And there is a lot going on. The GCSAA are with their First Green program,
Right,
inviting children in, which
right,
we know from a perception change communications perspective, those children are perhaps experiencing something for themselves, but perhaps going home and telling their parents
right,
and family
right.
family about it.
Mhm.
But some of those are long term things, though, and there's a bit of a kind of an urgency to getting on and doing this.
Yeah, it's really interesting because turfgrass management in golf is almost sort of this bipolar, bimodal reaction from people. So you'll see a really well manicured, beautiful golf course, and the problem is what they see on TV is at the absolute pinnacle of of management. That is every skill set right there, honed in. And so people who don't play golf or admire that or enjoy it, oh, look at that waste of resources. But those are the same people on the other end on a Saturday afternoon will sit in an SEC stadium and having paid a great deal of money to do that and enjoy that and cheer on their team on an equally pinnacle football field. Yet there's not, I've never heard anyone complain about the waste of resources on an SEC football field. Because, there aren't any, it's how we but the perception. One is a sport they enjoy and understand, and the other is something that they might be slightly away from because nobody in their family plays golf.
We're talking about better communications, and I guess the superintendent has a role in that, but not just presenting the facts, but storytelling as well in a way that's going to engage members, customers, but importantly, communities as well.
Mhm. And I think we need to ask them more to have the ability to do that. And that's things like, again, if if they're hosting a high-end tournament, the television station may do a little something. But we continually need to have them be able to step up and talk more about their job. A lot of them have really interesting paths to the job. A lot of them can speak really well to what drives them. And you see that a little bit on Twitter and again on the Facebook because it's amazing how many of these guys and or gals, but especially the guys, because they can be these folks that you might not think they're that person. And then they'll post a picture of a sunrise and they'll say, "This is the best office in the world," or "I never tire of this view." And you're like, "Oh, that's sort of deep for them." Yeah, and they're thinking. They're really thoughtful people about managing the course and expectations.
But that sort of authentic
Yes,
storytelling is really important, isn't it?
right.
In a world where a lot of it is promotion or
Right.
highly
And
messaged.
one of the other things that interests me is, and again, you'll see this on chat rooms and discussions, they think about the good ones realize that it's a game and you're providing a service that is entertainment. And so they'll ask about, "Hey, I've had this problem. What would you do if a golfer did X to you? What would you do?" And then other people will come in and say, "Oh, I would do this," or "I would suggest that," or "Have you talked to them?" Or like really interesting conversations like when they get high school vandalism. Somebody does donuts on the green and they very quickly can figure out who it is. "Okay, what would you do now? How did that turn out for you? What did you have them do?" "I had them come and work on the course for a week, and it turned out great. One works for me full time now." Yeah, those are really thoughtful conversations, and I think superintendents need to get the opportunity to have more conversations about that.
You come from a science background.
Mhm.
How important is that within the communications around environmental sustainability?
I think some of it's very important. Superintendents, and I teach a lot of, they need to know the basics so that they can communicate to somebody. One of the things we talk about are things like reducing nitrate leaching out of their into their groundwater and their role in that, and what are the things you can do to reduce that. They need to be able to have in their repertoire, well, what is the US EPA standard? When do I need to be concerned? The course I was teaching today, for example, 2 of the students, 2 of the attendees, one of them is at a very important environmental course in Hawaii, and the other one is in Florida. Again, very sensitive area around the Everglades. They keep full records. You could ask these 2 gentlemen at any time, "What's the nitrate looking like?" And they know. And that's where the science comes in. I don't think you need to be off the charts in terms of science, but they certainly need to be conversant with some of this.
And finally, Beth, just to come back to the beginning, value-added ecosystems and communicating all of that, what would be your message to the golf industry and golf businesses individually as clubs and courses?
I think they need to really be aware of what they provide to the environment. And when I say environment, that would be the community and everything around it and the critters and the things that are on that golf course. That they bring a lot to it. And I think sometimes they sell themselves short on what that is.
Beth Guertal, thank you very much for speaking to Changing the Business of Golf.
Thank you for having me.